Has the music in handbell ringing changed over time as you progressed in ringing generally? Has it changed from the beginning?
I think yes, I think it has. I think when I started handbell ringing, there was a strong feeling amongst British handbell directors that because handbells were a British instrument and we were a British group, that we should use as much British music as possible, and that's understandable. And there was music available, of course, through HRGB in those days. When one went to a rally when I started in the late 80s and early 90s, the majority of music that was played in rallies, in Southeast Region rallies or at the National Rally, was probably music that had come through the HRGB's shop, so at the sales tables, or it was music that had been arranged by a team member, and in many teams that was the case. So it was music that was out of copyright and had been arranged by a team member, not whose knowledge of handbell orchestration, handbell musicianship was possibly good, possibly not so good. So I think that's one of the reasons that I very much enjoyed ringing with St Lawrence Chobham Handbell Ringers was that Alan Collins was very open to music coming from other countries. So we rang, in my early years of handbell ringing, we rang music from America. I say obviously because nowadays much of handbell music comes from America, but in those days less of the music did. Alan made sure that we had music from a worldwide store, so he was very open to the idea of music from all over the place, and I've tried to continue that with Chobham and with KIPHRA, and of course with the regional groups that I was directing until fairly recently.
Well, it's interesting when you look back into history, when there was the decline in handbell ringing, there was very much an emphasis on Victorian music, and so nowadays, when you refer back to the 80s, was there a classical theme or folk theme, or how did that develop?
I think there was probably a folk theme. There was a folk and church theme, I think. So the Ash Grove is a piece that very strongly springs to mind as a piece of typical of that time. What a Friend We Have in Jesus. I remember being drilled by a Southeast Region conductor in What a Friend We Have in Jesus for about 2.5 hours in a rally on one particular year.
Wow.
So yes, church music, which was for the most part out of copyright. And and probably British folk music, I suppose. There was a great deal of William Gordon music, of course. And there was music from the Mayola collection back in those days as well. So I think there was a lot of British music, but most of it was music that was popular music
in the time,
from the 1900s, the 1920s, the 1930s, and hymn music. And I suppose a significant thing is that in 2017, when we celebrated our Golden Jubilee, one of the most popular pieces of music voted on by members of HRGB was a piece of music arranged by Rob Worrell called 3 for the Road, which actually, as I recall, is a medley of 3 World War I pieces of music. And I think that, it's a long way to Tipperary, pack up your troubles in your old kit bag. And those were the sorts of pieces, and probably in many handbell ringers' minds, are the sorts of pieces of music that handbells are associated with. And whilst anything that gets one into any sort of music is great, I would want to see as much as possible a broadening of the genres of music. So handbells come out of the church and folk niche into a much broader range of opportunities, so that there are people using handbells for jazz, there are people using handbells for pop music, there are people using handbells with orchestras for what would broadly be called classical music, although not in the narrow definition of the term, but would broadly be called classical music.
So actually part of an orchestra.
Part of an orchestra. And there have been, again, in America, because quite a large number of of handbell initiatives come from America at the moment, and all power to them.
Yeah.
In America, there have been several pieces of music written now. One with handbells and cello, which I know Yo-Yo Ma was involved in recording a year or so ago, and another one where William Payne, has written a concerto for handbells and orchestra, which I think is great. And that's one of the things I'd like to put on in this country fairly soon. We seem to have somehow, in some handbell ringers' minds, we have a sort of barrier between ourselves and and American music.
Yeah.
And I really hope and wish that barrier could break down.
Yeah.
Because we have a huge amount to be grateful for American handbell ringers for. Because of the huge popularity of our instruments in America, which we took over there and American people are using. We have a massive number of resources, ideas, new techniques and music from America now, which we can enjoy.
Which style do you use to ring? Off shoulder? Off table?
Off shoulder, or in hand.
And why?
I was, well, because that's a very good question, because that's how I was taught.
Yes.
Because that was the style that Alan Collins's group, St Lawrence Chobham Handbell Ringers, used, and it was the style therefore I was taught to use. Over the years I've also rung off table, and in fact when I was ringing bass bells with St Lawrence Chobham, I often did ring bass bells off the table rather than ringing them in hand. So a number of teams have this mixed economy. Treble and top bass clef ringers will ring in hand, but bottom bass ringers will leave their bells on the table, pick them up when they need to ring them and put them back in. As opposed to Japanese groups whose bass ringers often hold their bells in hand. So it was a sort of mixed economy. So when I'm ringing now, because I very rarely ring bass bells these days, because there are so many other people who want to do it, I will ring smaller bells in hand. That's the style that I was taught to use, and therefore I feel more comfortable with. But I, would hope very much and would want to do all I can to promote the continuation of both styles in this country. And I was talking with John Atkinson about doing what we can to support the idea of off-table ringing becoming more prevalent and developing more in the North Country and the Midlands, and for that matter in this part of the country.
Yeah, personally I started off shoulder and now ring off table. So it's incredible. I mean, it's all inclusive. That's what handbell ringing is about, isn't it? So you learn a technique, you can move to another team, you can learn another technique, you can read by numbers, you can read by music, you read by alphabet notation. That was another style that we saw at a recent AGM. So there's all manner of ways to include everybody.
Yes. Okay. I mean one of the things that we at the Northern Bell Orchestra, when I became the conductor there, musical director there in 2006, the person who initiated set up the Northern Bell Orchestra was very keen to give people who lived in that part of the country an opportunity to ring in a different style. And so she wanted everybody in the Northern Bell Orchestra to ring in hand. And that caused a little bit of a furore for the first rehearsal, because several people who came didn't know that was going to be the case, and decided after the first rehearsal that they didn't want to come back, which was very disappointing. And after that, we established, and I wrote about it in Reverberations back in 2007, I think, we established this idea that the style could be a mixed style. It didn't matter how one rang, as long as one observed basic musical ideas such as note length, note value, crescendos, diminuendos, and so on. So for off-table ringers, to some extent, that caused some difficulties, because the ideas of note lengths, for example, are sometimes more difficult if you're ringing off the table and you have to hold the bell for quite considerable, and then you've got another bell that you've got to pick up, but your conductor is insisting that you've got to hold this bell off the table for quite a long period of time. That caused some difficulties, but the ringers got over those. And what the Northern Bell Orchestra showed was that a mixed economy, a group of ringers who ring off table interspersed with another group of ringers who ring off shoulder, was perfectly manageable and very musical, as long as they were observing those basic musical principles.
What do you do if you have a ringer who's off sick and how do you cover all of the bells?
Oh my gosh. It will depend on where we are in the rehearsal cycle, and it will depend to some extent on the group. So if I take the two groups that I know most about, KIPHRA at the moment is in the lucky position of having a ringer who is prepared to float and fill gaps.
Yes, okay.
When she's not doing that, which is most of the time, because most of the time people are there, she rings the bass chimes for us.
Okay.
But if there's somebody away, she will fill a gap. So most of the time, it doesn't really have a significant impact, which is great. At the moment at St Lawrence Chobham, we don't have a floating ringer. We have had in the past, but we don't have a floating ringer at the moment. So if somebody is away, that either the options are either that there is a gap or that I ring.
Yes.
Generally, if I'm ringing, I am focused on the ringing and not on directing. As we move through the rehearsal schedule from early looking at a piece for the first time to late, getting ready for the actual concert itself, you know, 2 or 3 weeks before, even a month before the concert, what I will do will vary. At the beginning of the rehearsal cycle, I will generally fill in. Firstly, because I want the group to understand where all the notes are, and where all the crescendos and diminuendos and everything are. And actually, and of course, none of my teams will want me to say this, but when they're learning a piece of music, most of the time they're not looking at the conductor. So it doesn't really matter that I'm not there directing. So I will fill in. As we move to be more confident with the music and playing the music better, and we need to put more expression and interpretation into it, I'm better at the front, because I can direct if the team are used to it. Of course, there are many teams that play really well without musical directors, but if the team is used to a musical director, that's the time. That means there'll be a gap.
Okay.
And several team members will then say, do you want me to fill the bells in?
Okay, yes. So
now, my answer is almost always no. And my answer is almost always no, because when people focus on putting other bells in other than the ones that they're used to, they don't focus on their own.
No.
And 3 or 4 weeks before a concert, I really want people to focus on their own bells. A number of handbell ringers are uncomfortable with the idea of all the notes not being in, not being there in the music. And so sometimes it takes a bit of persuasion to explain to people that it doesn't matter that there aren't a few notes there. What is important is that as a group, even with a few notes missing, we're learning to express this piece of music together, and you are getting used to expressing your own notes in as musical a way as possible.
Thank you, Tim. What do you do if you've got too many ringers?
Good question. Both St Lawrence Chobham and KIPHRA are in the lucky position of having enough bells for duplicate ringers.
Okay.
So in St Lawrence Chobham's case, we have a full 5-octave set, and we also have 3 duplicate octaves. So if we have additional ringers, we have plenty of. KIPHRA have a full 5-octave set and an additional 1 octave, but we've never yet been in a situation where all of those bells have been fully used. And in both teams, because I have these gorgeous bass chimes, there is the option of using those bass chimes, which will fully occupy another ringer, because it does take a lot of time to learn and then to play them effectively. So at KIPHRA at the moment, we are using those bass chimes. At Chobham we're not, because frustratingly at the moment we don't have enough ringers to use them.
So how many ringers do you have at the moment in KIPHRA and Chobham?
Okay, so at KIPHRA at the moment we have 16 ringers. So 15, a full 5-octave set will normally take 15. And so because we have 1 additional ringer, as I explained a few moments ago, she will normally ring the bass chimes, but if somebody's away, she very kindly is prepared to go and fill in spaces. At Chobham at the moment we have 13, a team of 13.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Ball.